Statement, Minister Hamish Falconer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there have been a number of developments in the Middle East that I'd like to update the House on, including Gaza, Iran, Yemen and Syria. I'd also like to take the opportunity to provide an update on the case of Alaa el-Fatah, which has been a subject of debate during the parliamentary recess. Beginning with Gaza, the humanitarian situation remains desperate. Even with the ceasefire, 500,000 people are struggling to find enough food. 100,000 people are in catastrophic conditions. The peace plan was clear. The Israeli government agreed to let aid in without interference through the UN and other international organisations. At the same time, Hamas must disarm, their weapons must be decommissioned, and they must allow a path to lasting security for Palestinians. More trucks are entering Gaza, and this is very welcome. But right now, key crossings remain closed, convoys are being turned back, medical and shelter supplies are blocked, and NGOs are being banned. We join 9 other countries in stating that this is not acceptable over the recess. The peace plan cannot work if NGOs are shut out. Israel's decision to ban 37 of them is unjustifiable. Furthermore, many trucks entering Gaza carry commercial goods which face fewer barriers than humanitarian aid. This means, perversely, it is currently easier to get cigarettes and luxury goods into Gaza than the basic medicines and shelter that people so desperately need. Too much aid is still stuck at Gaza's borders. Thousands of tents and shelter supplies, funded by the UK, are waiting to get in. Families are sheltering from winter floods and storms under rubble. They are suffering from hypothermia and sewage running in the streets. This is unforgivable. We have not wavered in our commitment to help. This financial year, we're providing £116 million for humanitarian and other aid, healthcare, food, clean water and sanitation, including treatment for 800,000 Palestinians through UK Med. The UK formally recognised Palestine last autumn to protect the viability of a two-state solution and create a path towards lasting peace for the Israeli and Palestinian people. We welcome the establishment of full diplomatic relations with the State of Palestine, and I can confirm the establishment of a Palestinian embassy in London today. Let me now turn to Iran, where we've seen protests enter a 9th day following the rapid depreciation of the currency. We are disturbed by reports of violence against those who are courageously exercising their right to peaceful protest. We are monitoring developments closely and we urge Iran to protect fundamental freedoms, including access to information and communications. The UK was integral to the delivery of the Iran Human Rights Resolution adopted by the UN Third Committee in November. It called on Iran to halt its human rights violations, including in relation to women and girls, ethnic and religious minorities, and of course, to stop the use of the death penalty. We will continue to work with partners to hold Iran to account for its rights record. I know that many in this House will also be thinking about Craig and Lindsay Foreman, who spent Christmas in detention in Iran. We are deeply concerned that they have been charged with espionage. We're focused on supporting them and their family, and we remain in regular contact with the Iranian authorities. The Foreign Secretary raised their case with the Iranian Foreign Minister on the 19th of December. I also wish to provide the House an update on another consular case that has been in the spotlight for many years, Alaa el-Fatah. Supporting British nationals overseas is at the heart of the work of the Foreign Office, and the provision of that consular support is based on the circumstances of the case. Following Mr el-Fatah's registration as a British citizen in 2021, successive governments gave him consular support and made it a priority to argue for his release. That is why it was welcomed by ministers across the government and many others in this House when he was released from detention in September and reunited with his family in the UK on Boxing Day. However, we recognise and share the deep concern felt across the country following the subsequent emergence of extremely disturbing historical social media posts by Mr. El Fattah. Let me emphasise once again that the historical posts were abhorrent, and I join my colleagues in condemning them wholeheartedly. It is right that Mr. El Fattah has apologised. I fully recognise the profound distress these posts have caused, in particular to the Jewish community in this country, especially in the context of rising anti-Semitism and recent horrific attacks against Jewish people, both in this country and around the world, and I very much regret that. The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and I were all unaware of those historical posts, as were the civil servants working on the case. The Foreign Secretary has therefore asked the Permanent Under-Secretary to urgently review the Department's systems for conducting due diligence on high-profile consular and human rights cases to ensure that all necessary lessons are learned. The Foreign Secretary has undertaken to update the Foreign Affairs Select Committee on the changes that the Department will put in place. I turn now to the dramatic developments in Yemen, which we are monitoring closely. I welcome calls by Yemen's president for dialogue in the south. I welcome too Saudi Arabia's offer to host a conference and the United Emirates' call for de-escalation. A swift diplomatic resolution will best serve the Yemeni people. We remain committed to supporting Yemen's unity, including the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council and the Government of Yemen, as we set out in the recent UK-led UN Security Council statement. I, the Foreign Secretary and the National Security Advisor have all been in regular contact with our partners in Yemen, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates about the situation. We will continue to work closely with them. We must not forget that Yemen already faces one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. 18.1 million people are facing acute food insecurity. I saw it for myself in November when I visited clinics supported by the UK in Aden. Responding to this crisis is a priority for the UK, with the largest donor to the Yemen Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, maintaining our commitment to £139 million in humanitarian aid this financial year. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn to Syria, where the past year has seen remarkable change. The Syrian government has shown commitment to tackling security threats, joining the global coalition against Daesh and committing to dismantle Assad's chemical weapons stockpiles. In my engagements with the Syrian government, I have heard directly a commitment to build a Syria for all Syrians. But despite this progress, the challenges remain immense. There have been outbreaks of sectarian violence in the last year, most recently in Latakia at the end of December. The recent attack on US soldiers in Palmyra is a reminder of the enduring Daesh threat. A stable Syria is firmly in the UK's interest, reducing the risk of irregular migration, terrorism and other threats to our national security. That is why we have stepped up our engagement and support to Syria over the last year. The UK remains an active partner in the global coalition against Daesh, and on the 3rd of January, the RAF conducted a joint strike with France on an underground Daesh facility north of Palmyra. The UK will continue to do what is necessary to prevent a Daesh resurgence and support Syria's stability and protect UK national security. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope this update on developments in the Middle East over recess is helpful to the House. His Majesty's Government remains committed to playing its full role in the Middle East.
Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker, Britain's place in the world matters, and this side of the House is clear that our influence should be used to its fullest to support efforts to combat the complex and dangerous conflicts and tensions that we speak too often about when it comes to the Middle East in this House. From Israel to Gaza, Iran, Syria and Yemen, the UK can and should be able to make a difference. On Iran, on these benches, we stand with the brave Iranians in their fight for freedom against a terrorist-supporting, despotic and oppressive government. Yeah. Their fight for freedom must prevail. So can I ask the Minister what discussions are taking place with our partners in the region over the actions that can be taken to stop the regime's cruel and barbaric acts against those campaigning for freedom? Iran threatens our own domestic security by continuing with its nuclear weapons program, providing weapons and drones to Russia, its backing of China and repression in Hong Kong. Britain must send them a clear signal by imposing more sanctions on them, taking action to stop the sanctions busting that takes place through cryptocurrencies and other methods that facilitate and bankroll this tyrannical regime. Can I ask why the government and its ministers, in his statement today, have been silent specifically on those issues? And where is the plan now to keep Britain safe from Iran? And what is being done to secure the immediate release from Iran's cruel captivity of Lindsay and Craig Foreman, the two British nationals who tragically are still in captivity? I appreciate that he refers to the call that took place on the 19th of December, but what practical measures are being done? On Gaza, Hamas continues to breach the ceasefire in Gaza. They have refused to release the body of the remaining Israeli hostage Ran Gildi, which has been in terrorist captivity for over 820 days. Can I ask the Minister what pressure is being put on Hamas to adhere to the terms of the ceasefire, to disarm and bring Ran back to his family? Will he also confirm, and he's mentioned this on aid, that 4,200 trucks are being delivered in aid to Gaza each week in accordance with the 20-point peace plan, then that is being overseen by COGAT and the CMCC? Is he meeting with CMCC and COGAT to see the operational delivery of this aid and the role that the United States is playing in securing this aid delivery? And on the licensing of NGOs, can the Minister confirm that the number of agencies that have been through the licensing programme, how many have been, and what contribution are they now making? We know and we understand, and we've heard so much in recent weeks and months about terrorists infiltrating aid agencies and diverting aid. So what discussions has he had with ministers within the Israeli government as well and his counterparts to work with them to find practical solutions that address the serious concerns that have been raised so that more aid can get through and is not compromised to terrorists? On reforms to the Palestinian Authority, why is the government still backing them with taxpayers' money while they continue with the pay-to-slave programme? And when will this practice stop? Turning to Yemen, I agree with the Minister's comments made about Yemen and the conflict and the humanitarian suffering. Every single successive government has worked tirelessly to secure more aid and to support our global efforts when it comes to the suffering in Yemen. But what direct discussions has the Minister had with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are both long-standing partners and players, particularly over the recent dispute and tensions that have taken place? And is there a bridging role that Britain can play here? And what planning is underway with our partners in the region to respond to further threats from the Houthis? And on Syria, the targeted actions on Daesh were absolutely essential. But there are still many concerns about the stability when it comes to Syria. When will progress be made when it comes to tackling the sectarian violence, protecting minority rights, delivering the democratic transition? What quantity of chemical weapons has been disposed of? What measures are being taken to stop the criminality, the gangs, the drugs and the weapons? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Al Fatah case, I welcome the way in which the FCDO in particular has now instigated this inquiry. Can I ask when this inquiry will be completed in terms of what has happened? Was the government informed by any other government departments in terms of the views that were expressed? And I recognise what the Minister has said thus far. And will the ministers in particular, probably now in the Home Office, pick this case up and work fast to strip him of his citizenship, as this side of the House has been requesting over the recent recess period?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that I have been in touch with my counterparts in both the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and indeed spoke to the Yemeni Foreign Minister this morning. We are in intensive discussions with all of our partners in the region on the questions in Yemen, which are very significant. I did not speak about the Houthis, but they remain a very significant threat, and I saw some of that threat during my visit to Yemen in November. In relation to Syria, I thank her for her spirit of cross-party cooperation on the strikes that we conducted. There remain very significant questions which are outstanding about the security of Syria, which I'm sure she and other members of the House will have been tracking. The violence in the end of December is indeed concerning. There has been progress on a range of questions. We need to see the independent reviews that were conducted into the violence, both in the coastal areas and in the south, followed through, including accountability measures, and I have made those points, as has the Foreign Secretary, directly to our Syrian counterparts. She asked the important questions about chemical weapons. I'm very pleased that there is now an OPCW programme engaged to ensure the destruction of chemical weapons. That will be of real interest to this House, given the extent to which chemical weapons in Syria have been discussed here even before the time I was elected, and that is welcome progress and important for regional security. On Iran, she is right to highlight the bravery of the protesters. She will have seen, I'm sure, also our spokesperson's statement over the course of the last few days, and indeed the remarks I have just made. We are speaking, of course, to our partners in the region. We are careful in the way we discuss matters in Iran. It is absolutely obvious that some in the leadership of Iran wish to portray these protests as being externally animated. Of course they are not. This is a response from the Iranian people themselves. In relation to Mr. Al-Fattah and the next steps, he was, as she knows well, provided citizenship by the previous government. That is not something that is stripped lightly. She would have seen the remarks of the Home Secretary during Home Office all questions earlier during the day. In terms of the timeline of the review, we intend it to be swift. We want to draw a line under this matter as quickly as we can and ensure that in all other cases, appropriate lessons are being learned. In relation to aid, aid in Gaza, I'd like to be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are talking here about charities like Oxfam and Save the Children, credible charities supported by the British public who have donated generously over the course of Christmas. There has, of course, been concerns in relation to aid in Gaza. We have ensured wherever they have been raised, they have been investigated, but we should not let that take away from the credibility of the organisations involved. It is vital that those aid agencies are able to work. 30% of Gazans cannot afford basic food. She is right to say that there has been an increase in the aid going into Gaza, but it is not yet in line with the 20-point plan. Still, UN truck shipments are going in less numbers than was agreed. I think the number is of 250 aid trucks from the UN going in a day, only 147 are going in. It is welcome that commercial goods are getting into Gaza, but as I said in my statement, it is vital that it is the life-saving humanitarian aid, in particular tents and medicines, that get it.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his statement this afternoon. And I entirely agree with him that at a time when the humanitarian crisis in Gaza remains so desperately urgent, that the decision by the Israeli government to withdraw accreditation from 37 aid agencies, 37 extremely credible aid agencies such as Caritas Internationalis, ActionAid and the International Rescue Committee, is an act of cruelty. And will the Minister therefore join with me in condemning this decision and urge Israel in the strongest possible terms to rescind it immediately before more deaths are occurring in Gaza and the West Bank because of the lack of the humanitarian aid that we need? And will he also urge them to open up the Rafah crossing as a matter of extreme urgency?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. We have engaged extensively with the Israeli government, both on the importance of overturning, both against the NGO registration provisions when they were announced, against the deregistration process that she describes, and we have also called repeatedly for the opening of the Rafah crossing as well as other vital crossings.
Calum Miller, Lib Dem spokesperson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. I regret the Government is presenting developments on 4 significant states in one statement, but I'll do my best to respond in the time afforded to me. While the attention of the world is seized by the illegal actions of the US President, it is crucial that the UK works closely with our allies to support just, lawful and humanitarian action in the Middle East. After 2 years of widespread destruction, people in Gaza are already facing severe shortages of food, clean water and medical supplies in the midst of winter. What immediate action is the government taking to persuade Israel to reverse its decision to bar reputable international aid agencies from Gaza and the West Bank? The continued expansion of settlements on Palestinian land by Netanyahu's extremist cabinet since the House last met is explicitly intended to undermine any prospect of a two-state solution. So will the government implement immediate sanctions on members of the Israeli cabinet, a full ban on the import of settlement goods, and finally publish its response to the 2024 ICJ ruling that Israel's occupation is illegal under international law? Liberal Democrats condemn the violent repression of public demonstrations in Iran. The casual threats from the US President to take unilateral military action merely serve to escalate tensions. So how is our government working with European and regional partners to coordinate lawful external pressure on Iran? And when will the government commit to prescribing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps under UK law? The people of Yemen desperately need peace, yet regional powers continue to intervene to support the armed factions. So will the government review all arms export licences to Saudi Arabia and UAE to ensure that UK weapons are not enabling them to sustain the conflict? The UN estimate that around 24 million Yemenis desperately need food and protection. How is the UK ensuring that humanitarian aid reaches those most in need, particularly in areas where access is restricted or contested? The Liberal Democrats support limited multilateral strikes against Daesh in Syria to ensure the eradication of their infrastructure and to counter their dangerous and violent ideology in the Middle East. Can the Minister confirm that the government is confident these recent strikes were fully compliant with international law and proportionate to the threat? And what steps is the government taking to ensure the new Syrian government is protecting the rights of all, including minorities and women?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for the spirit of the question. To address why I put so many developments into the statements, there were so many developments that I wish to update the House at the earliest opportunity and provide colleagues an opportunity to ask questions on any element of it. We will continue to voice our position in relation to the absolute vital importance of the right to assembly in Iran and indeed a right to communications as well, and we will continue to do that alongside our partners and indeed in our own voice as well. I am confident and can assure the House that the strikes on Iran were consistent and compliant with international law. We, as I said to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, we continue to raise the importance of accountability in relation to violence in Syria with the Syrian government. In relation to developments in Yemen, particularly on questions of aid, there is, I'm afraid, a very significant divergence between the ability of the UK to deliver aid in the areas controlled by the Houthis and the areas not controlled by the Houthis. The Houthis have continued to seize aid workers and indeed aid premises. It is simply not possible under these circumstances to have an aid operation which operates at the scale of the needs of the Yemeni people. I call again on the Houthis, as I have repeatedly, to release all those they've detained, to leave those offices and to abide by humanitarian principles. If they do not, it is simply not possible for the UK or indeed any other humanitarian actor to ensure that the Yemenis get the support that they require. In relation to arms sales, we, as I know the Liberal Democrat spokesperson is aware, we have the most robust arrangements in the world, and I'm confident that they have been followed in this case, but of course we keep these matters as ever under close review.
John McDonnell.
I was one of those MPs who campaigned hard for the release of Alaa Abdel Fattah. So can I say to the Minister, it's important that when the considerations are taking place about the overall process around that, there is an accurate narrative. And the narrative partly is this, that yes, there were vile social media interventions by this person, which we all condemn, but which he apologised for. But more than that, he became a campaigner in his own country for civil rights in Egypt, because he's a joint citizen, for civil liberties, civil rights, religious freedom, campaigned against anti-Semitism, and for that has served 10 years in prison. Not many in this chamber has gone anywhere near that record of campaigning for these civil liberties. So maybe that narrative could be taken into account when consideration is taken about this individual?
Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his question. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not want to prejudge what the review may find, but we provide consular assistance to many thousands of British nationals every year. There is, of course, a debate, which the Shadow Foreign Secretary alluded to, about whether or not he should have been made a citizen in 2021. But in 2024, when we became a government, he was undoubtedly a British citizen. We will continue, I am sure, to provide consular assistance on a non-judgmental basis. If a British national is in considerable distress overseas, if there are outstanding questions about their treatment, then British nationals of all kinds can rely on the support of the United Kingdom.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all welcome the statements the Minister has made. I certainly agree with him on the strikes in Syria and the view he's taken towards the Houthis in Yemen, who have murdered so many people over recent years. May I ask him about a separate aspect of the Iranian situation that we're seeing? We're seeing extraordinarily courageous protesters on the streets all across Iran in various different cities and towns. But we're also seeing Russian cargo aircraft coming in, landing in Tehran, presumably carrying weapons and ammunition. And we're hearing reports of large amounts of gold leaving Iran. I was wondering whether he could update the House on any of those reports which suggest that the regime itself is preparing for life after the fall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, for reasons I'm sure the Right Honourable Gentleman will understand, I'm not in a position to give a detailed update on the reports he alludes to. I would simply underline the point I made in my statement, which is that the freedom of assembly, the right to protest, are inalienable rights of the Iranian people, and we want to see the Iranian government respect that.
Melanie Waugh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and let me start by thanking the Minister for all his work on Yemen, which gets too little attention. I know it's a personal commitment of his, and the humanitarian crisis there is truly horrific.
Hear, hear.
As he said, over Christmas, the Israeli government banned 37 international humanitarian organisations, many of them British, from delivering life-saving aid in the state of Palestine. They include Medical Aid for Palestinians, the International Rescue Committee, Action Aid and Médecins Sans Frontières. In doing so, Israel follows in the footsteps of other aid-banning regimes such as North Korea, Russia and Myanmar. More civilians are dying as a result. We know from the last 2 years that words and statements have no impact on the behaviour of this Israeli government. So when will the UK take real action, impose sanctions on all of those Israeli government officials who are involved in this illegal, inhumane ban on humanitarian organisations?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend speaks with considerable experience of delivering aid in Palestine. She will know I won't comment further on sanctions, but this question of the NGO's ability to operate in Gaza is obviously vital for the very, very pressing questions which face the Palestinian people, and the British government will continue to raise them.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also very much welcome the fact that the Minister made such reference to Yemen. As the Honourable Lady has just said, we often talk in this chamber that Sudan doesn't get enough attention, but the attention that's been focused on Yemen, given the scale of the crisis there, has been pitiful, I'm afraid, in this Parliament, and I hope today it reflects a change in that. But how can he convince us that he and the Foreign Office can actually deliver on prioritising these issues when, as we've already heard in the previous statements, there are so many other issues that are commanding attention?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to fulsomely emphasise that I would like it if there were fewer issues on the international stage and indeed in the Middle East, particularly over the Christmas period. But there clearly is a range of very, very significant and important developments which are happening both in the region I am responsible for and indeed those of my colleagues. Yemen is a priority for us. I was glad to be the first minister to visit in 6 years. The developments subsequent to my visit obviously underline both how dramatic the stakes are in Yemen and how important it is that the UK remains focused. It's one of the reasons why I've been speaking to my colleagues in Yemen, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates over the last few days.
Paul Waugh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the fact that, as the Minister said, the UK is spending £116 million this financial year on aid to Palestinians. That's vital aid for healthcare, food, clean water and sanitation. But the fact remains that that aid is often stuck at the border because of the continued closure of the Rafah crossing. But also, more importantly, at a time of humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which is desperately urgent, the decision by the Israeli government to withdraw support or accreditation for the NGOs like Action Aid, Care International, International Rescue Committee and the Norwegian Refugee Council is an act of calculated and unconscionable cruelty, isn't it? And will the Minister join me in condemning that act and, as my honourable friend says, consider urgently the question of sanctions against Israeli ministers responsible for it?
Minister.
My honourable friend has been a doughty campaigner on these issues since he arrived in the House. I don't have much further to add. The British position is absolutely clear in relation to the deregistration of NGOs. We opposed the proposals when they were first mooted, and we oppose the deregistration now. These are credible organisations. He refers to many of them featured in the disasters, the DEC appeal that was ongoing through Christmas, and I know that many of our constituents, including my constituents in Lincoln, will have contributed fulsomely because they are so keen to see aid entering Gaza in the way that we all know it needs to.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister speaks at length about humanitarian need and the UK's desire to lead. Yet the reality is that this government has cut aid to its lowest level this century. The OPTs, Yemen and Syria all face cuts, and Syria alone this year aid has been slashed by 35%. So how can the government credibly claim urgency on humanitarian access, stability and peace, whilst simultaneously withdrawing aid budgets? And in Gaza, the Minister rightly condemns the suspension of licences of INGOs, but the restriction of humanitarian aid is against international humanitarian law. So, beyond the words, what consequences will this government place on the Israeli government?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've talked at some length before about the actions we've taken, including sanctions against two Israeli ministers. I won't, for the reasons I've already alluded to, speculate on sanctions from the dispatch box. On the questions that the Honourable Lady asks about aid, it's absolutely incontrovertible that we have made tough decisions in relation to aid budgets, but we also have to be clear on the restrictions that are in place, which no amount of money can overcome. We talked about the situation in Yemen, particularly in the Houthi-controlled areas. I am not saying that the overall volumes of aid do not matter, but some of the questions on which, in all of these contexts, are most vital is whether or not access for that aid is allowed. You can spend an awful lot of money on aid which then ends up waiting in warehouses, and that's why we have been focused in the way that we have.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's statement. On the lack of progress in Gaza, this is a real concern, and then on top of this shockingly callous display by the Israeli government in banning the 37 organisations. It just is incomprehensible. But I want to focus on what's happening in the West Bank and people being stripped of their land, murdered in cold blood, as these illegal settlements are expanding. When will the government act in lockstep with international allies and use the legislative tools at their disposal, such as the 2018 Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act, so that we can stop the illegal trade that is happening and make sure that we're banning goods, services and investments from the illegal settlements?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I know she's written to me and the Foreign Secretary on these questions, and I'll respond fully to that letter. She knows that the government is deeply concerned by the expansion, both in settlements themselves and violence associated with it. That's why we joined our E4 colleagues from France, Germany and Italy in a statement on this. That's why we condemned the most recent announcements from the Israeli government in relation to settlements, and it is why we have continued to press them, not just on the approval of settlements, but also on correspondent banking, which is an issue of vital importance to the Palestinian economy. It was good that there was a temporary extension of correspondent banking arrangements for the West Bank, but that must be extended further.
Dr. Andrew Murrison.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister for a comprehensive regional update. It looks like we may be seeing the beginning of the end of a wicked regime that has ruled Iran since 1979. However, despite the best intentions of Israel and the US last year, a large part of Iran's nuclear inventory remains intact and potentially poses a threat if the regime crumbles. What measures can be taken, reasonably taken, to ensure that that inventory is secured and that it is put beyond use by any malign state or non-state actors?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my predecessor is knowledgeable on these questions and invites me to comment on a speculative proposal, what would happen should the Iranian government fall in response to these protests. I have learned in this job not to make predictions or to speculate in this way. All I will say is that the status of Iran's nuclear program remains of the utmost interest and priority to the British government. It is why we reimposed the snapback sanctions late last year. We will continue to monitor these developments very, very closely. Nuclear proliferation is amongst the gravest threats, not just to regional but global security, and we will continue to give it the focus that it deserves.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reality is that Israel continues to breach the ceasefire whilst the international community continues to offer words and statements of concern without any real action. As we've already heard in the Chamber today, this week it announced that 37 international aid organisations will now be prevented from distributing aid in the occupied Palestinian territories. That means more women and children already starving will die in continuation of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Does the Minister not think that the time for words of concern and statements of concern without action is over? And when will he finally announce proper, meaningful action, including ending all arms sales, widespread sanctions on Israel in the same way we have done to Russia for its war crimes in Ukraine, and ending all trade with illegal settlements?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have set out already the continued aid efforts. I've set out the work we're doing both alone and alongside partners to ensure that these points that we're discussing this evening are made with the force that they require to the Israeli government, and will continue to do so.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It won't surprise you that I'm going to echo more or less what many people have said on Gaza across this House, which is 1.6 million people are facing starvation, winter floods, winter storms, freezing temperatures. Aid has been totally blockaded. 37 NGOs, including Médecins Sans Frontières, Norwegian Refugee Council, ActionAid, Oxfam and others are denied access. And less than 10% of aid that was received before October 23 is now getting through. And the question that keeps getting asked in this House is this: what's the next concrete step that this UK government is prepared to take? If we can't discuss sanctions and all we're discussing talk, is there something else that can be given, is offered to all of us in this House who are desperate to hear some further progress that's going to be made? Thank you.
I can reassure the honourable gentleman this has been a priority through the Christmas period. We will continue to work on it with the urgency that it requires, and I will continue coming to the House to provide updates.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I feel I must press the Minister on this issue about the settlements that were announced over the Christmas period, further 19 of them in the West Bank, because Minister Smotrich has been explicit. This is about deliberately making it impossible to establish the Palestinian state. It brings to the total in the last 3 years alone 69 new settlements in the West Bank, several of which were ones that had previously been dismantled. These actions are provocative at best, deeply destabilising for the peace process that will benefit so many people in both Israel and Palestine as a result. He has said that the government condemns them, but we know in this history of this crisis that condemnation isn't enough. We do need concrete action. So what more can he tell us about his conversations with our allies in America, for example, who I know are also concerned about the settlements? What will he take to stop this deliberate attempt to stop the peace process?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, let me say a little bit about those 19 settlements that were announced. I condemned them immediately. I have sanctioned the minister in question, Minister Smotrich. I announced it in June. He is completely committed politically to oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state. As I announced in my statement, today we have a Palestinian embassy in London. The British government now irrevocably recognises a Palestinian state. I recognise the force of what she says. There are ministers in the Israeli government completely opposed to the establishment of a Palestinian state. That is not the policy of the British government, and it is not the actions that I and the rest of the government have taken since July 24.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Minister pointed out, the situation in Gaza remains catastrophic, and I join with other colleagues in recognising that against that backdrop, the barring of these aid agencies or access by these agencies is particularly cruel and wicked, and it's horrifying to think what the motivation might be. But of course these agencies also deliver services in the West Bank, where, as colleagues have also pointed out, the situation deteriorates with home demolitions, summary executions and seemingly psychopathic thugs roaming the territory, burning homes and attacking innocent Palestinians. We have happily, though, recognised the state of Palestine and have, as the Minister said, now established full diplomatic relations. So against that backdrop, if the Palestinian government were to request that the UK cease trading with foreign nationals illegally resident on its territory, on what basis would we refuse?
I will, as I did with his colleague, resist the temptation to be drawn into speculative questions, but just to be clear, the West Bank is considered Palestinian territory. Israeli goods must be labelled as being produced within Green Line Israel if they are to benefit from the trade arrangements they have with the UK. If they are not produced in Green Line Israel, they are subject to very different arrangements indeed. I understand, I think the right honourable gentleman has signed the letter that my colleague has, and I'll provide a full response in due course.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to pick up on the point that my honourable friend was talking about in terms of aid getting in and the paucity of that. But just the utter ridiculousness of how Israel is frustrating not just the quantity of aid, but really the basic elements of aid, such as tent poles and tents or razor blades, whatever, or generators, claiming that somehow they are dual use and therefore a potential threat. Could I urge him, really in terms of humanitarian basis, to pick this up with his opposite number about just how wrong this is and how he is denying humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine?
My honourable friend makes important points. The dual-use list, which is restricting aid into Gaza, is clearly having very, very significant humanitarian effects, covering a wide range of items, including the shelter items he described. It has also had a very adverse effect on the ability to ensure even the rudiments of health provision in Gaza. We have and will continue to call on the Israeli government to review the dual-use list and ensure that vital supplies get in the quantity that is required with the urgency demanded.
Brian Matthew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Minister's statement and the good news about the establishment of the Palestinian embassy today in London. My question, however, concerns Sudan. As a member of the International Development Committee, the latest assessment we have on the number of killings in Al-Fasher is now 75,000 people. The horror that those poor people are living and dying through every day demands action. Before the city of El Obeid, suffers the same fate or worse. With millions of people at risk of starvation through this war, what discussions are being had with the UAE to stop the flow of weapons and with the African Union to see an expeditionary peace force put together to save Sudan? Thank you.
The Honourable Gentleman is right to highlight the situation in Sudan. It's the worst humanitarian crisis of our time, despite the many other pressures that I described in other parts of the world. We are doing all we can politically and diplomatically to end the fighting. It remains a priority for the Foreign Secretary and the Minister for Africa, and we're working alongside the US-led Quad, including in engagements with our colleagues in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and all those with an ability to influence.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This morning I had the honour to attend the official opening of the Palestinian embassy in my constituency by His Excellency Ambassador Hussein Zomlot, and also by 14-year-old Abida, evacuated to the UK for medical treatment after losing 2 of his limbs in Israeli bombings. Can I thank the Minister for his work in achieving recognition, which his predecessors failed to do in the past 80 years, and also for supporting the medical evacuations. But can I press him on this point about action against settlements? When the Israeli government has a declared policy of using settlements to prevent that very Palestinian state that we have just recognised, what practical steps or what reason can he give for not taking action to stop investment in settlements and to stop trade with settlements?
I thank my honourable friend for his kind opening remarks. It's easy with so much going on to lose sight of the individual cases in these conflicts, and meeting some of the children that we have medically evacuated is a truly humbling reminder both of the horror of war, the horror of what is happening in Gaza, but also the power of the UK to really make a difference to people's lives. So I'm grateful to him for bringing it to the House's attention. We are not only committed to a Palestinian state, we have recognised one. We have set out clearly where that Palestinian state is, and that clearly has implications under international law. Points we have made both in relation to the most recent set of settlements announced by the Israeli government, and indeed some of the other very significant settlements, including the E1 settlement that have been announced. There are also steps that we are taking in relation to the correspondent banking questions, which are also vital. I can assure my honourable friend and indeed the House that we will continue to work on these issues through the new year.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement. He rightly condemns the outrageous blocking of delivery of humanitarian aid that's desperately needed in Gaza. His statement did not mention the West Bank, but as colleagues have highlighted, another development over the Christmas period was the decision of the Israeli Security Council to permit establishment of 19 new settlements. Now, the Minister rightly condemned this, but repeated condemnation, which is repeatedly ignored by an Israeli government that repeatedly breaks international law, is simply not enough. So will the Minister finally take the very straightforward, concrete step that is open to him of banning all trade with illegal settlements? They are illegal, their proceeds are proceeds of crime. Why will he not take that step?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd remind the House that I've announced 3 waves of sanctions in relation to settlements in the West Bank. I've announced sanctions on both Mr Smotrich and Mr Ben-Gvir, the 2 politicians in Israel, in the Israeli government, that colleagues from across the House have most often referred to in their understandable concern about the expansion of settlements. I will respond to the letter in relation to goods. There is, as I said to the honourable gentleman from the Conservative benches, there are very different arrangements in place for trade with those settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory.
Tan Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The number of illegal settlements approved by the Netanyahu government in the occupied West Bank has shamefully reached the highest level since 2017. Alongside this, as the wholly inadequate level of humanitarian aid reaching desperate Palestinians in Gaza, the Israeli government has cruelly withdrawn the accreditation of a further 37 NGOs and has also cruelly blacklisted some essential items. Does the Minister agree that this continued intolerable suffering must stop? And what is the UK government doing to increase aid and ensure that NGOs can operate freely to distribute aid to the vulnerable and the dying?
My honourable friend has pushed these points with force, and I know that he will continue to do so in this House. As I've set out our position on deregistration, I've set out our position too about the importance of removing restrictions and ensuring that the aid we and so many others are providing, including, I'm sure, some of his constituents in Slough via the DEC appeal, gets to the people who need it in Gaza, and we'll continue to work on that.
Shawkat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. More than 500 aid workers have been killed by Israel in Gaza since October 2023. Back in October 2024, the Prime Minister then said, our Prime Minister said to Israel, and I quote, that the world will not tolerate any more excuses on humanitarian assistance. So can I please ask the Minister to explain any tangible policy steps that the UK will take? Not words, not condemnation, tangible policies, now that Israel has taken further actions to obstruct much-needed aid and endangered our aid workers.
The honourable gentleman is right to talk of the danger to aid workers. He, and I know many others across the House, will be aware that more than 500 aid workers have died in the Gaza conflict. I have set out some of what we are doing to try and ensure that aid gets into Gaza. We will continue to take those steps. We will continue to work with our partners in the way that I have set out.
Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Minister that Mr El Fattah's tweets are abhorrent, and I'm glad that the government has made its position on his views clear. But I cannot understand the clear lack of due diligence on such a high-profile case, which has led to getting him over here being a priority for successive governments. It calls into question the adequacy of the procedures within the FCDO if even the civil servants working on the case were not aware of his tweets. So can the Minister set out what he will do to ensure that due diligence is conducted on high-profile consular cases so that officials can provide advice and ministers can make decisions with as full an understanding as possible of the facts relating to any particular case?
Minister.
It is precisely the concerns that my honourable friend outlined that led to the Foreign Secretary commissioning the Permanent Under-Secretary to conduct the swift review I described in my statement, and will update the House when it's concluded.
Caroline Burden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's quite difficult to know what to focus on in this wide-ranging statement, the rights of women and girls in Iran, or the awful situation in Yemen, but I would like to focus on the situation with Israel banning 37 international aid organisations like MSF and Oxfam from Gaza. Now, in the Minister's statement, he uses passive language. He says too much aid is still stuck at Gaza's borders. Now, this might be the ex-Reuters editor in me, but I'd like to say that I think that's wrong. The aid is not stuck at Gaza's border. It is being deliberately held there in an act of cruelty by Israeli government who does not want the aid to help the people of Gaza. So could the Minister please tell the House exactly what the UK government is doing to restore access? What leverage are they using to force the Israeli government to reverse this cruel decision? And when will they work with EU allies to bring in much wider sanctions? Perhaps it's time for trade, sporting, cultural sanctions against Israel, so they will really listen, rather than just a passive statement which is clearly making no impact on the Israeli government's actions.
Minister.
I hesitate to argue with an editor, but I think it's been absolutely clear in my statement today, and indeed all of my statements from the moment I went myself to Al Arish, to the warehouses where aid was being blocked by the Israeli government from crossing the border. It is absolutely clear what the British government's view is about the restrictions on aid which are imposed by the Israeli government.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The provision of aid is needed at pace. The provision of healthcare is needed at pace. And yet over the last 27 months, pace has not been the response. And what I would say to the Minister is, how is he taking a step back and looking, for instance, at the instruments available to him, like the international law framework, to ensure that that can operate at pace? Because clearly without pace, the Israeli government feels that it has impunity to do whatever it wishes.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I alluded to in my last answer, we have wanted more aid into Gaza since almost the first day we were the government. I have travelled extensively to the region and seen the restrictions on aid. I have called repeatedly for the Israelis to allow that aid in. We will continue to work to try and see that aid getting in at the pace and the scale that is required. We are doing a range of things. We are part of the CMCC, which the Shadow Foreign Secretary visited and I believe met our UK embeds within the CMCC. We have worked with the Jordanians on airdrops. We have gone to Al Arish ourselves to make these points. The Foreign Secretary went to Jordan in November. I would not wish her or anybody else in the chamber or watching at home to draw any other conclusion than the British government is committed to getting aid in as quickly as possible.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to pick up this theme mentioned across the House around increased settlements and trade. And along with the concerns expressed from across the House, I have a particular concern that currently there are Israeli settlements that are trading with the UK but passing their goods off as coming from Israel. And as the Minister said himself, there's more favourable trading arrangements if you do trade with Israel vis-à-vis trading with the settlements. So will the British government commit to publishing segregated trade statistics by category of good and by origin of good vis-à-vis Green Line Israel versus the settlements?
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman asked an important question and he raises the spectre of those in the occupied Palestinian territory falsely labelling their goods as being within the Green Line. Publishing more detail about goods which he alludes to potentially being falsely labelled would probably not enlighten the House or anybody else on what the truth of the situation is. What I would say to all of those who are in the occupied Palestinian territory who are producing goods in settlements is if they breach the arrangements set out very clearly for trade with the UK, then they will be in breach. The HMRC will investigate and we will take action.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister alluded to from the dispatch box, British taxpayers have witnessed atrocities committed by Israeli authorities in Gaza, then acted to donate to NGOs that are ordinarily able to deliver much-needed humanitarian aid to Gaza. However, Israeli authorities continue to impede full humanitarian access, leaving aid paid for by the British public out of the reach of those who urgently need it. Can the Minister explain to the British public how the UK plans to urgently solve this ongoing issue and ensure an end to the obstruction of British charities?
Minister.
Thank my honourable friend for the question. As I set out in the statement, it is very clear in the 20-point plan what the provisions around aid need to be, and they include the unimpeded operation of the UN and humanitarian agencies. That is what we need to see, and we are talking to all of our partners, as well as raising these points directly with Israel to ensure that, as she says, the aid provided from the UK and many other places gets into Gaza in the way that it needs to.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As Israel continues its brutal treatment of Palestinians in Gaza, aid remains blocked, even as people face flooding, severe weather and freezing conditions that have already claimed the lives of infants. I asked the Minister why the government is not demanding full, unrestricted access for international aid workers, UN agencies and medical teams, and I ask why is foreign media still barred from Gaza? What is the UK doing to ensure independent, international journalists can report freely so the world can see the true scale of the devastation and the horrific crimes being committed?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out already why we want international NGOs in Gaza, why it's so vital that aid can get in an unimpeded way. It is also vital that international journalists and indeed journalists of all kinds are able to report freely.
Alex Serble.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know the Minister is aware of the case of Marwan Barghouti. Marwan Barghouti's case was reported by the Interparliamentary Union to have been in violation both of the Oslo Accords and the Geneva Convention, have been abducted by Israel from the West Bank and put on trial in Israel. He will have seen the reporting today that Sanction Minister Ben Gvir said that Barghouti should be executed, an unconscionable statement by a sanctioned Israeli minister. Can I ask the Minister whether the government has assessed the compatibility of Mr Barghouti's trial and detention with international humanitarian and human rights law, and whether this informed any representations made the Israeli authorities beyond calling for ICRC access?
Minister.
Well, let me be clear. The British government opposes the use of the death penalty in all cases, everywhere, as a principled position. The treatment of detainees in Israel has been a question that we have also raised recently, and I'm happy to revert to him on the more detailed question he asks about Mr Barghouti.
Chris Coughlin.
Deputy Speaker, I was extremely proud to serve on the anti-Daesh campaign in the Foreign Office and the Army. I think it's important to recognise that that campaign is both just and, I believe, represents the UK actually learning the lessons from Afghanistan and Iraq in what has been a largely successful intervention. And I strongly welcome the new government in Syria, but it is, of course, concerning that there has been an increase in ISIS activity in the last year. But perhaps the most intractable issue with ISIS, in my experience, is the 27,000 ISIS members and their families in prisoner camps in Syria, including many children who are being radicalised. Can the Minister assure me that both the government and the global coalition is monitoring this risk and taking what practical measures it can to prevent the next generation of ISIS emerging?
Minister.
I thank the gallant member for his service both in the Foreign Office and in the British military, and I can confirm that the camps in North East Syria remain a high priority for the British government.
Dr Scott Harper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the Minister for his statement and also for being so quick to condemn Netanyahu when yet again tried to blockade into Gaza, and also for condemning those new settlements which hopefully won't actually go forward. But I do want to talk about Iran. Before Christmas time, I visited a few schools in Edinburgh South West, Boroughmuir, Balerno, Curry, Tynecastle, and there I met young people who were really keen to vote. We've got a Scottish Parliament election this year. But I contrast that with what I see on social media, young people in Iran, around the same age, out in the street, risking everything to vote, particularly women, given the Nobel pressures in this country. So will he join me in applauding these young people in Iran, particularly women, for all they're doing? And when he meets his counterpart, will he remind them that these people have the right to protest and the right to determine their country's future?
Minister.
I thank him for the question. We do remind the Iranian authorities of the right to protest. It is vital that that right is able to be conducted both with access to communications, which have come under pressure in Iran in recent days, and indeed without the threat of violence.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Deep down, we all know that there is no real ceasefire. How can it be a ceasefire when more than 500 civilians, Palestinians, have been murdered, approximately 100 of them children? We all celebrated the New Year with family and friends with fireworks when IDF soldiers celebrated New Year's by firing unlimited bullets to Gaza blindly. The level of depravity is unspeakable. And now we know that 37 reputable organisations are being prevented from providing humanitarian aid. There is one suggestion. We know that 9 countries, along with the UK, expressed their concern. Can I ask the Minister, what stops the Minister, this government, from joining with those 9 countries and making a visit to the ICC and raising this matter so we get a ruling and then enforce it, if necessarily, with military?
The Honourable Gentleman will be familiar with the deliberations of the ICC already in relation to this conflict. The ICC is supported by the UK, but it operates independently and at a distance, rightly, from the ministers of this country and any other.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his statement and his continued work in the region. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the IDF continue to deliberately target children in Gaza. The ongoing genocide and the systemic destruction of medical facilities in the region means that those desperately sick and injured children are unable to access the medical attention they need. But I'd like to thank the Minister for meeting with Abeda and Mahmoud, two medically evacuated children hosted by the Prime Minister in Number 10 just before Christmas. But will the Minister update the House in terms of what work is going on in terms of increasing the numbers of Gazan children that will be medically evacuated to this country for the need that they need, the support they need? Minister.
I was deeply moved to meet the injured Gazan children with my honourable friend. As I said during that meeting, it is vital that we ensure that children in Gaza have access to the healthcare that they need. It is vital that the supplies to provide that healthcare are able to get into Gaza. It is in most cases going to be more appropriate that children who have to leave Gaza to get medical assistance are provided that assistance in the region, but there are clearly specialised cases where the UK can make a real contribution, and we continue to look at that, and I'll return to the House shortly on it.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his very detailed statement. It's much appreciated by all of us in this House who have a very, very deep interest in human rights, and we thank him for that. We know his heart's in it, and we appreciate it. Iran is in the throes of street protests for the price of and access to food. 31 people killed, women and girls denied basic human rights. But for years, Christians, Baha'is, Shias, Sunnis, and many other religious groups have been directly abused and murdered, churches destroyed, religious groups have been denied access to education, to health, to jobs, to property, even the right to have their own burials of their co-religionists and their own graveyards. It is truly time, I believe, to step up all actions to protect these religious groups in Iran and to give the freedom that Iranian people desire. What can be done with the Iranian government in exile to deliver the freedom, the liberty, the democracy, and for a secular and non-nuclear republic that all Iranians desire? Thank you.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman. We set out, alongside many of our partners in the international system, a statement covering a range of rights-based issues as at the UN Third Committee in November. Freedom of expression, freedom of religion are important rights which we will continue to advocate across the world.
James Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and on behalf of my constituents, I welcome the establishment of the Palestinian Embassy in London today. Just turning to Syria, its long-term stability depends on protecting its long-standing diversity and preventing sectarian violence, as the Minister has alluded to. In light of recent violence and the lack of progress this weekend in integrating the Syrian Democratic Forces in northeastern Syria into national institutions, I wonder what the Minister would say about the progress that's being made in terms of building an inclusive Syria for the future.
Minister.
It is vital that Syria is a place which is seen as safe and secure, not just by its majority, but the important minorities which are a vital part of Syria's fabric. My honourable friend refers to the Kurds of northeast Syria. There's also, of course, a range of other minorities, not limited to the Alawites, the Druze, and others. It is vital that the Syrian government provides all minority communities in Syria with assurance of their place in the new Syria, and we discuss these questions regularly with the Syrian government.
Calum Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The combined operation of Royal Air Force Typhoons and French aircraft in Syria reminds us of the continuing threat Daesh plays to the people of Syria and our partners in the region, the importance of our European allies, and the importance of funding a strong and capable military. Would my honourable friend, or would the Minister, agree with me that we should honour our brave servicemen that took part in this operation? And can he outline what steps are being taken to ensure the continued security of Syria?
I would like to thank my gallant friend for his service in the RAF. I am very proud to be the MP for RAF Waddington. He probably trumps me, honestly, in closeness to the RAF, given his long service there. They performed vital work in countering the threat of Daesh in Syria. We will continue, both with our diplomatic and all other levers, to ensure that Daesh does not re-emerge in Syria and pose a threat not just to Syria, but to the region and indeed the UK.
Kirstine Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Late last year, I met constituents who run a community link with Glasgow in the West Bank. Villagers there have described a daily life of hostility and obstruction by police and intimidating, threatening intrusions by nearby settlers, despite Israeli court rulings in favour of the villagers on repeated occasions. Can the Minister advise how the UK's recognition of the State of Palestine will translate into practical steps to protect communities like Jayus and advance peace, security and democratic governance?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend and her constituents. We will continue to take actions as required to ensure that the rights of Palestinians are protected. Indeed, as my honourable friend alludes to, Israeli courts have upheld those rights on a number of occasions, and it is vital that the rule of law is seen and does operate in these areas.
Warren de Jos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement and for all the work that he has been doing on these issues. What reason has the Israeli government given us for stopping these NGOs from operating in Gaza? And if it is absolutely clear, as has been mentioned by other members in the House, that it is a deliberate act of cruelty to prevent healthcare and aid going into Gaza and to defeat the peace plan, what action are we taking as a UK government against Israel and to reinstate the NGOs?
Minister.
As they have set out publicly, the Israeli government have sought more detail about the Palestinian staff of these NGOs. Many of these NGOs have not provided it, given concerns over the targeting of aid workers. That impasse has led to the deregistration of many of these NGOs. A number of international parties, including the UK, have proposed acceptable solutions consistent with humanitarian principles to try and navigate these concerns, but they have not been taken up.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister advised in his statement that consular cases of British citizens detained abroad are at the heart of the work of the Foreign Office and provided an update on some of these cases. My West Dumbartonshire constituent Jacktar Singh Johal remains arbitrarily detained in India for over 8 years now. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2 weeks' time it will be 3,000 days. What is being done now to secure his release, beyond just raising his case with Indian counterparts? We've been doing that for 8 years with no effect.
I know how dedicated my honourable friend is to the case of his constituents. I raised in particular the cases in Iran. I wouldn't want the House to draw conclusions about relative priority. There are a range of cases across the world of great sensitivity, and I'm sure the Minister responsible for India, where his constituent is detained, will be happy to meet him to discuss it further.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Palestinian embassy, but with the crisis in Gaza still acute, the Israeli government's decision to strip NGOs of accreditation is unconscionable and puts vulnerable families at even greater risk. I welcome the steps taken to bring injured Gazan children here for treatment, but many are just too unwell to travel. What additional steps, whether through field hospitals, specialist equipment and teams and medicines, will the Minister provide for children still in Gaza who are unable and not stable enough to travel to receive this specialist treatment?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. I need to be clear that there is that the contribution that the UK has made in the provision of aid to children is always going to be a tiny drop in the ocean of overall need. We are working in the ways that I've set out to try and ensure that medical assistance is provided in Gaza with all of the equipment and expertise that that involves. Where that is not possible, we have provided aids to the Egyptian healthcare system in order to support Palestinians there. I have met some of them myself in Al-Arish General Hospital, but where there are, as I set out to my honourable friend from Liverpool, where there are specialised cases, then we must indeed look at them, and I'll say more to the House in due course about that.
And the final question, Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Minister for taking over an hour's worth of questions on the updates that he's provided right across the region. And I know it's a very difficult job that he has to do, particularly with the decimation of US aid and the cuts in our own aid. I wanted to ask a question about what we are doing to open the borders for those people who have family and connections to the UK to be able to escape the horror that they're in Gaza and be able to get a visa to visit family here in the UK. Can he update the House on any progress he's had in getting those borders open, or any discussions he's had with the Home Office to stop the restriction of biometric and be able to apply for visas from within Gaza?
My honourable friend has been a committed campaigner for cases in her own constituency, and I know that there are colleagues right across the House with constituency and personal interest in these cases. As I said to the House shortly before we rose, there are a range of cases where we have been able to provide support, both in relation to Tugendhat students, some of the medically injured children that we've discussed already. It remains a real challenge to ensure that people with a legitimate reason to travel are able to do so, and I'm happy to take up any individual cases with him.
And that concludes the statement. Point of order, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, could you please advise how I might elicit satisfactory responses to a series of written questions that I have tabled to the Treasury on the impact of business rates on retail, hospitality and leisure businesses? I had asked for very specific figures relating to the number of businesses the Treasury expect to be eligible for transitionary reliefs, how many premises will be brought into paying rates for the first time as a result of the recent evaluations, and an analysis of the number of businesses who previously enjoyed RHL reliefs and would see increases from the 1st of April. None of these questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, none of them have received substantive replies. I raised the matter with the Leader of the House by letter before Christmas, but have not yet had a response. Could you please advise me whether there are any other routes available to me and other parliamentarians so we can receive accurate and data-rich responses to questions so we can effectively scrutinise government policy which is hammering our high streets?
I thank the Honourable Lady for notice of her point of order, which will have been heard by the government front bench. As has been said before, the Chair is not responsible for the content of Ministers' answers. However, the Procedure Committee is conducting an inquiry into written parliamentary questions, which is accepting evidence until Friday the 16th of January, and I am sure that they will be interested in the issues that the Honourable Lady raises.